Hey everybody, this is part 2 of the Carmilla audiobook reading. I assume you're coming right from the first part, but if you haven't heard that, go back and listen to that first. We're picking up right where we left off, in the middle of chapter 2. Just in case you need a refresher, currently Carmilla and her father are out for a walk around their estate. They were meant to have been visited by General Spielsdorf in the coming weeks with his daughter, but Carmilla's father has just received a letter that states that General Spielsdorf's daughter is dead, and General Spielsdorf has vowed to travel the land in search of his daughter's mysterious killer to avenge her. I think that's enough of an intro. Let's get right back into it. At this moment, the unwanted sound of carriage wheels and many hoofs upon the road arrested our attention. They seemed to be approaching from the high ground overlooking the bridge, and very soon the equipage emerged from that point. 2 horsemen first crossed the bridge, then came a carriage drawn by 4 horses, and 2 men rode behind. It seemed to be the traveling carriage of a person of rank, and we were all immediately absorbed in watching that very unusual spectacle. It became, in a few moments, greatly more interesting, for just as the carriage had passed the summit of the steep bridge, one of the leaders, taking fright, communicated his panic to the rest, and after a plunge or two, the whole team broke into a wild gallop together, and dashing between the horsemen who rode in front, came thundering along the road towards us with the speed of a hurricane. The excitement of the scene was made more painful by the clear, long-drawn screams of a female voice from the carriage window. We all advanced in curiosity and horror, me rather in silence, the rest with various ejaculations of terror. Our suspense did not last long. Just before you reached the castle drawbridge, on the route they were coming, there stands by the roadside a magnificent lime tree. On the other stands an ancient stone cross, at sight of which the horses, now going at a pace that was perfectly frightful, swerved so as to bring the wheel over the projecting roots of the tree. I knew what was coming. I covered my eyes, unable to see it out, and turned my head away. At the same moment, I heard a cry from my lady friends who had gone on a little. Curiosity opened my eyes, and I saw a scene of utter confusion. 2 of the horses were on the ground. The carriage lay upon its side with 2 wheels in the air. The men were busy removing the traces, and a lady with a commanding air and figure had got out and stood with clasped hands, raising the handkerchief that was in them every now and then to her eyes. Through the carriage door was now lifted a young lady who appeared to be lifeless. My dear old father was already beside the elder lady, with his hat in his hand, evidently tendering his aid and the resources of his Schloss. The lady did not appear to hear him, or to have eyes for anything but the slender girl who was being placed against the slope of the bank. I approached. The young lady was apparently stunned, but she was certainly not dead. My father, who piqued himself on being something of a physician, had just had his fingers on her wrist and assured the lady, who declared herself her mother, that her pulse, though faint and irregular, was undoubtedly still distinguishable. The lady clasped her hands and looked upward, as if in a momentary transport of gratitude, but immediately she broke out again in that theatrical way which is, I believe, natural to some people. She was what is called a fine-looking woman for her time of life, and must have been handsome. She was tall, but not thin, and dressed in black velvet, and looked rather pale, but with a proud and commanding countenance, though now agitated strangely. "Who was ever being so born to calamity?" I heard her say, with clasped hands as I came up. "Here am I, on a journey of life and death, in prosecuting which to lose an hour is possibly to lose all. My child will not have recovered sufficiently to resume her route for who can say how long. I must leave her. I cannot, dare not, delay. How far on, sir, can you tell, is the nearest village? I must leave her there, and shall not see my darling, or even hear of her till my return, 3 months hence." I plucked my father by the coat, and whispered earnestly in his ear, "Oh, Papa, pray ask her to let her stay with us. It would be so delightful, do pray." "If madam will entrust her child to the care of my daughter, and of her good governante, Madame Perrodon, and permit her to remain as our guest, under my charge, until her return, it will confer a distinction and an obligation upon us, and we shall treat her with all the care and devotion which so sacred a trust deserves." "I cannot do that, sir. It would be to task your kindness and chivalry too cruelly," said the lady, distractedly. "It would, on the contrary, be to confer us a very great kindness at the moment when we most need it. My daughter has just been disappointed by a cruel misfortune in a visit from which she had so long anticipated a great deal of happiness. If you confide this young lady to our care, it will be her best consolation. The nearest village on your route is distant and affords no such inn as you could think of placing your young daughter at. You cannot allow her to continue her journey for any considerable distance without danger. If, as you say, you cannot suspend your journey, you must part with her tonight, and nowhere could you do so with more honest assurances of care and tenderness than here." There was something in this lady's air and appearance so distinguished and even imposing, and in her manner so engaging as to impress one, quite apart from the dignity of her equipage, with a conviction that she was a person of consequence. By this time, the carriage was replaced in its upright position, and the horses, quite tractable, in the traces again. The lady threw on her daughter a glance which I fancied was not quite so affectionate as one might have anticipated from the beginning of the scene. Then she beckoned slightly to my father, and withdrew 2 or 3 steps with him out of hearing, and talked to him with a fixed and stern countenance, not at all like that with which she had hitherto spoken. I was filled with wonder that my father did not seem to perceive the change, and also unspeakably curious to learn what it could be that she was speaking almost in his ear with so much earnestness and rapidity. 2 or 3 minutes at most, I think, she remained thus employed. Then she turned, and a few steps brought her to where her daughter lay, supported by Madame Perrodon. She kneeled beside her for a moment, and whispered, as Madame supposed, a little benediction in her ear. Then, hastily kissing her, she stepped into her carriage. The door was closed. The footmen in stately liveries jumped up behind. The outriders spurred on. The postilions cracked their whips. The horses plunged and broke suddenly into a furious canter that threatened soon again to become a gallop, and the carriage whirled away, followed at the same rapid pace by the 2 horsemen in the rear. Chapter 3. We compare notes. We followed the cortege with our eyes until it was swiftly lost to sight in the misty wood, and the very sound of the hoofs and the wheels died away in the silent night air. Nothing remained to assure us that the adventure had not been an illusion of a moment, but the sweet young lady, who just at that moment opened her eyes. I could not see, for her face was turned from me, but she raised her head, evidently looking about her, and I heard a very sweet voice ask complainingly, "Where is Mamma?" Our good Madame Perrodon answered tenderly, and added some comfortable assurances. I then heard her ask, "Where am I? What is this place?" And after that she said, "I don't see the carriage. And Matska, where is she?" Madame answered all her questions in so far as she understood them, and gradually the young lady remembered how the misadventure came about, and she was glad to hear that no one in or in attendance on the carriage was hurt, and on learning that her mamma had left her here, till her return in about 3 months, she wept. I was going to add my consolations to those of Madame Perrodon, when Mademoiselle de la Fontaine placed her hand upon my arm, saying, "Don't approach. One at a time is as much as she can present converse with. A very little excitement would possibly overpower her now. As soon as she is comfortably in bed, I thought, I will run up to her room and see her." My father, in the meantime, had sent a servant on horseback for the physician, who lived about 2 leagues away, and a bedroom was being prepared for the young lady's reception. The stranger now rose, and leaning on Madame's arm, walked slowly over the drawbridge and into the castle gate. In the hall, servants waited to receive her, and she was conducted forthwith to her room. The room we usually sat in as our drawing room is long, having 4 windows that looked over the moat and drawbridge upon the forest scene I have just described. It is furnished in old carved oak with large carved cabinets, and the chairs are cushioned with crimson Utrecht velvet. The walls are covered with tapestry and surrounded with great gold frames, the figures being as large as life, in ancient and very curious costume, and the subjects represented are hunting, hawking, and generally festive. It is not too stately to be extremely comfortable, and here we had our tea, for with his usual patriotic leanings, he insisted that the national beverage should make its appearance regularly with our coffee and chocolate. We sat here this night, and with candles lighted, were talking over the adventure of the evening. Madame Perrodon and Mademoiselle de la Fontaine were both of our party. The young stranger had hardly lain down in her bed when she sank into a deep sleep, and those ladies had left her in the care of a servant. "How do you like our guest?" I asked as Madame entered. "Tell me all about her." "I like her extremely," answered Madame. "She is, I almost think, the prettiest creature I ever saw. About your age, and so gentle and nice." "She is absolutely beautiful," threw in Mademoiselle, who had peeped for a moment into the stranger's room. "And such a sweet voice," added Madame Perrodon. "Did you remark a woman in the carriage after it was set up again who did not get out?" inquired Mademoiselle, "but only looked from the window?" "No, we had not seen her." Then she described a hideous woman with a sort of colored turban on her head, and who was gazing all the time from the carriage window, nodding and grinning derisively towards the ladies, with gleaming eyes and large white eyeballs, and her teeth set as if in fury. "Did you remark what an ill-looking pack of men the servants were?" asked Madame. "Yes," said my father, who had just come in. "Ugly, hang-dog-looking fellows as ever I beheld in my life. I hope they mayn't rob the poor lady in the forest. They are clever rogues, however. They got everything to rights in a minute." "I dare say they are worn out with too long traveling," said Madame. "Besides looking wicked, their faces were so strangely lean and dark and sullen. I am curious, I own, but I dare say the young lady will tell you all about it tomorrow if she is sufficiently recovered." "I don't think she will," said my father, with a mysterious smile and a little nod of his head, as if he knew more about it than he cared to tell us. This made us all the more inquisitive as to what had passed between him and the lady in the black velvet, in the brief but earnest interview that had immediately preceded her departure. We were scarcely alone when I entreated him to tell me. He did not need much pressing. "There is no particular reason why I should not tell you. She expressed a reluctance to trouble us with the care of her daughter, saying she was in delicate health and nervous, but not subject to any kind of seizure. She volunteered that, nor to any illusion, being, in fact, perfectly sane." "How very odd to say all that," I interpolated. "It was so unnecessary." "At all events, it was said," he laughed. "And as you wish to know all that passed, which was indeed very little, I tell you." She then said, "I am making a long journey of vital importance," she emphasized that word, "rapid and secret. I shall return for my child in 3 months. In the meantime, she will be silent as to who we are, whence we come, and whither we are traveling." That is all she said. She spoke very pure French. When she said the word secret, she paused for a few seconds, looking sternly, her eyes fixed on mine. I fancy she makes a great point of that. You saw how quickly she was gone. I hope I have not done a very foolish thing in taking charge of the young lady. For my part, I was delighted. I was longing to see and talk to her, and only waiting till the doctor should give me leave. You, who lives in towns, can have no idea how great an event the introduction of a new friend is in such a solitude as surrounded us. The doctor did not arrive till nearly 1 o'clock, but I could no more have gone to my bed and slept than I could have overtaken on foot the carriage in which the princess in black velvet had driven away. When the physician came down to the drawing room, it was to report very favorably upon his patient. She was now sitting up, her pulse quite regular, apparently perfectly well. She had sustained no injury, and the little shock to her nerves had passed quite harmlessly. There could be no harm in my seeing of her, if we both wished it, and with this permission I sent, forthwith, to know whether she would allow me to visit her for a few moments in her room. The servant returned immediately to say that she desired nothing more. You may be sure I was not long in availing myself of this permission. Our visitor lay in one of the handsomest rooms in the Schloss. It was, perhaps, a little stately. There was a somber piece of tapestry opposite the foot of the bed, representing Cleopatra with the asps to her bosom, and other solemn classic scenes were displayed, a little faded, upon the other walls. But there was gold carving, and rich and varied color enough in the other decorations of the room to more than redeem the gloom of the old tapestry. There were candles at the bedside. She was sitting up, her slender, pretty figure enveloped in the soft silk dressing gown, embroidered with flowers and lined with thick quilted silk which her mother had thrown over her feet as she lay upon the ground. What was it that, as I reached the bedside and had just begun my little greeting, struck me dumb in a moment and made me recoil a step or two from before her? I will tell you. I saw the very face which had visited me in my childhood at night, which remained so fixed in my memory, and on which I had, for so many years, so often ruminated with horror, when no one suspected of what I was thinking. It was pretty, even beautiful, and when first I beheld it, wore the same melancholy expression. But this, almost instantly, lighted into a strange, fixed smile of recognition. There was a silence of fully a minute, and then at length she spoke. I could not. "How wonderful!" she exclaimed. 12 years ago, I saw your face in a dream, and it has haunted me ever since." "Wonderful indeed," I repeated, overcoming with an effort the horror that had for a time suspended my utterances. 12 years ago, in vision or reality, I certainly saw you. I could not forget your face. It has remained before my eyes ever since. Her smile had softened. Whatever I had fancied strange in it was gone, and it and her dimpling cheeks were now delightfully pretty and intelligent. I felt reassured, and continued more in the vein in which hospitality indicated, to bid her welcome, and to tell her how much pleasure her accidental arrival had given us all, and especially what a happiness it was to me. I took her hand as I spoke. I was a little shy, as lonely people are, but the situation made me eloquent and even bold. She pressed my hand. She laid it upon hers, and her eyes glowed as, looking hastily into mine, she smiled again and blushed. She answered my welcome very prettily. I sat down beside her, still wondering, and she said, "I must tell you my vision about you. It is so very strange that you and I should have had, each of the other, so vivid a dream that each should have seen, I you and you me, looking as we do now, when of course we both were mere children. I was a child, about 6 years old, and I awoke from a confused and troubled dream, and found myself in a room, unlike my nursery, wainscoted clumsily in some dark wood, and with cupboards and bedsteads and chairs and benches placed about it. The beds were, I thought, all empty, and the room itself without anyone but myself in it. And I, after looking about me for some time and admiring especially an iron candlestick with 2 branches, which I should certainly know again, crept under one of the beds to reach the window. But as I got from under the bed, I heard someone crying and looking up while I was still upon my knees. I saw you, most assuredly you, as I see you now, a beautiful young lady with golden hair and large blue eyes and lips, your lips, you as you are here. Your looks won me. I climbed on the bed and put my arms about you, and I think we both fell asleep. I was aroused by a scream. You were sitting up and screaming. I was frightened and slipped down upon the ground and, it seemed to me, lost consciousness for a moment. And when I came to myself, I was again in the nursery at home. Your face I have never forgotten since. I could not be misled by mere resemblance. You are the lady whom I saw back then. It was now my turn to relate my corresponding vision, which I did, to the undisguised wonder of my new acquaintance. I don't know which should be most afraid of the other, she said again, smiling. If you were less pretty, I think I should be very afraid of you. But being as you are, and you and I both so young, I feel only that I have made your acquaintance 12 years ago, and have already a right to your intimacy. At all events, it does seem as if we were destined from our earliest childhood to be friends. I wonder whether you feel as strangely drawn towards me as I do to you. I have never had a friend. Shall I find one now? She sighed, and her fine dark eyes gazed passionately on me. Now, the truth is, I felt rather unaccountably towards the beautiful stranger. I did feel, as she said, drawn towards her, but there was also something of repulsion. In this ambiguous feeling, however, the sense of attraction immensely prevailed. She interested and won me. She was so beautiful and so indescribably engaging. I perceived now something of languor and exhaustion stealing over her, and hastened to bid her good night. The doctor thinks, I added, that you ought to have a maid to sit up with you tonight. One of ours is waiting, and you will find her a very useful and quiet creature. How kind of you! But I could not sleep. I never could with an attendant in the room. I shan't require any assistance. And, shall I confess my weakness, I am haunted with a terror of robbers. Our house was robbed once, and 2 servants murdered. So I always lock my door. It has become a habit. And you look so kind, I know you will forgive me. I see there is a key in the lock. She held me close in her pretty arms for a moment and whispered in my ear, "Good night, darling. It is very hard to part with you, but good night. Tomorrow, but not early, I shall see you again." She sank back on the pillow with a sigh, and her fine eyes followed me with a fond and melancholy gaze, and she murmured again, "Good night, dear friend." Young people like, and even love, on impulse. I was flattered by the evident, though as yet undeserved, fondness she showed me. I liked the confidence with which she at once received me. She was determined that we should be very near friends. Next day came, and we met again. I was delighted with my companion, that is to say, in many respects. Her looks had lost nothing in daylight. She was certainly the most beautiful creature I had ever seen, and the unpleasant remembrance of the face presented in my early dream had lost the effect of the first unexpected recognition. She confessed that she had a similar shock on seeing me, and precisely the faint antipathy that had mingled with my admiration of her. We now laughed together over our momentary horrors. That brings us to the end of chapter 3. I hope that you enjoyed this section of the reading, and I hope that you join me again next week for chapter 4. It's starting to get interesting. Okay, good night now.